Happy Thanksgiving week, everyone. Welcome to Movies Are Life. I'm your host, Nathan Chandler, and I'm super excited to talk about one of my favorite all-time movies and the quintessential Thanksgiving movie, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. And what makes this discussion even more exciting is that I convinced my cousin, Greg Ross, to come onto the podcast because it's fair to say that we probably watched this, I don't know, how many times do you think, Greg, when we were kids?
One of my questions for you. How many times do you think you watched this movie?
Oh my gosh.
A dozen?
More than a dozen, I think. Yeah. Well, first off, how are you doing?
Very well. Was excited for the prompt to rewatch this movie. Doing super well. Super tired. Really. As many times as we have watched this, it's been at least 5 years, I think, since I watched it.
Yeah,
and which means this was my first time watching it as a father with like a family, like through that lens. Super cool. Super different experience.
It is. Let me intro you first a little bit too. Our listeners, so Greg's my cousin. I'm only about 7 months older than you. And so we literally grew up together in Longview, Texas. We went to the same schools, the same church, had the same friends, same church basketball teams, same baseball teams. And then we both went to Baylor. We lived in the same dorm. We even had the same major, but then you had to go ruin it all and move to Montana.
Yeah, I get a bit of that. I was up here for probably my second year in Montana. So we're probably talking 2009 or 10. And Mom asked how often I planned to come home because she had done the math and I had only come home once each year or something like that. And she's like, if I die at the age that my mother died, I get to see you 5 more times.
Jeez.
She really gave me the guilt trip.
Yeah, that's like a major guilt trip there.
And she was laughing when she said it. You know, she was like, I know what I'm doing here, but it's kind of an amusing, but you should come home more. And so I have. But yeah.
In all seriousness, I appreciate you doing this because, as you mentioned, you're very tired, and part of that is because you have 2 very young, cute children, and so, and I'm sure you don't usually have a lot of time to sit down and watch a movie. So I appreciate you taking the time to watch this one.
Thrilled to. No, it was a wonderful excuse. Great to set some time aside just to do this, like an assignment. It was great. Thanks.
Yeah. Growing up together, we had a lot in common, and mainly in the type of movies and entertainment that we watch. And I would think it would be fair to say that we're drawn to the same type of humor. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely.
Yes. So like Tommy Boy comes to mind, Billy Madison, anything early 90s SNL. We shared a common adoration for Weird Al. Anything basic, Airplane, anything stupid. I don't know if you can think of anything else.
Those like checked some of the boxes that I was going to mention for sure, because this movie tugs on a lot of those strings. Just checks the boxes, hits the high points of the best of all of those flavors. It's great.
So before we talk about the actual movie, I was going to ask you just because I know we both like grew up on this movie, but I couldn't tell you exactly like the first time I watched it or whatever. So was this something that do you remember? Like it was something your parents showed you?
I don't remember who I saw it first with, but I do distinctly remember watching it with my parents and then fast forwarding through the car rental scene.
Right. Yes. Yeah, famously so.
I don't remember when, but I for sure remember that.
Yeah. So I know that this was like one of the few films that we owned on VHS. Like we didn't own many. And the fact that it was also like rated R compared to the rest of the movies, it was kind of a weird thing. And it's definitely because of the car rental scene. So yeah, like you, it was very much like a fast forward situation, or, it's not very helpful to mute the scene because he dictates the words so well. It's, it doesn't take much imagination to know what he's actually saying. But I mean, this is a movie that all people adore. But I can't help but think that your dad probably really enjoyed this, being a travel agent and owning his own travel agency.
Yeah, my wife Betsy had prompted me to ask Dad, and I failed to before you and I are speaking, but to ask how many calls he got from stranded people or people who were like, I've lost my ticket, or, just the meltdowns. And I'm sure it was a constant thing for him, but I never had that touch point to his business to know, like, if he was taking a call at night, that was probably what was going on. But I'm sure it occurred all the time, and I'm sure he loved it for that reason. Absolutely. Or maybe it stressed him out. I don't know.
It might have. Well, enough teasing. Let's grab our shower curtain rings and hope that our rental car doesn't burst into flames as we talk about the John Hughes road trip classic, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
During holiday travel, some people get delirious. Some get delayed. And some get Del Griffith.
American Light and Fixture, Director of Sales, Shower Curtain Ring Division.
Neal Page got all three.
I was on my way home to spend a nice holiday with my family. Instead, I'm in a motel bed with a stranger.
So instead of Thanksgiving with his family, he's spending 3 days with the turkey.
Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is a 1987 classic comedy directed and written by John Hughes that follows the misadventures of Neal Page, a high-strung advertising executive played by Steve Martin, as he tries to make it home for Thanksgiving. Neal's plan go awry when he encounters the bumbling and overly talkative shower curtain ring salesman, Del Griffith, portrayed by John Candy. So that's basically the movie in a nutshell. First off, I just want to hear. I think you teased it. It's a good way to go into this. Flat out, like my early review, like I just think this is like a comedic masterpiece of a movie. But especially revisiting, like you, it's probably been some time since I saw it. I think I even texted you and jokingly said, I really don't feel like I have to rewatch this movie because I'd seen it so many times. But as you had mentioned, now having a family of your own, seeing it through that lens, yeah, like how did this movie change for you?
I really expected a profound change. I really expected to have like my heartstrings tugged, like, oh my gosh, I need him to get home. Like his family's waiting, all those cutaways to them at the recital, all of those things. And honestly, I was like, just get back to the two funny people. Like that I was watching the movie. That's all I kept thinking about was like, yeah. I haven't matured at all. And it didn't affect things one little bit. So yeah, I really expected there to be a profound difference, but that was not the case. I certainly empathize more, but as a movie watcher, I did not care for those scenes as much.
That's fine. You're just a heartless person.
Sometimes I'm reminded of that. It seems that way.
Well, I think probably like you, I mean, you definitely watch for the comedic stuff. And I think, it's interesting. The family thing. Yeah. It wasn't that so much, but it's still always kind of like, I love the message of this movie as far as, this relationship that he's thrown into, but to just, I mean, it serves as a good reminder to that, like all people are people, right? And there's always, everybody has their, walls up to whatever that is. And just the moments of, vulnerability that Del Griffith, expresses is amazing. But then it works so well because I'm sure most people could think of a Del Griffith in their life, like someone who like completely annoys you so much. But if any kind of emergency happened, you could call and that person would be there right away.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's for sure. The odd couple pairing of the two and just the frustrations, but the likability. And I recall always watching this movie feeling bad for Steve Martin. And that's something that changed for me. I felt worse for Del this time than I have in previous viewings. He was obviously annoying, but such a sweetheart. He made a bigger impact on me this time.
Right. Yeah. And it works so well. I mean, it's probably, especially probably when we watched this movie, it was probably the first big like I mean, this movie is never really talked about as like something with a twist ending. So you think of something like The Sixth Sense or something like that. But I mean, legitimately, I think it's a pretty big twist. Like at the end of when you're like, oh my gosh, he's completely homeless and he's just trying to make it in life. It's pretty heartbreaking.
It is, absolutely. And all the threads throughout that, there's no way that one probably would put that together. But just seeing in hindsight, knowing that he's homeless, the opportunities where he's probably more grateful even than his Gabby self is able to express, somebody bought his meal, his cab fare, got the hotel room. Like those are not necessarily hustles, but they are a little bit.
Yeah.
But he for sure like has to just have this immense gratitude that he can't express without tipping his hand. So he's just holding on to that for a while.
Yeah. And part of this movie is, I don't call it just a comedic masterpiece because I think it's just so funny and completely holds up, but that the heart element of it too. But I think really, kind of, I would say maybe studying it this time a little bit more, I just realized that like there's a comedic bit that occurs and it's funny on the surface itself, but John Hughes was such an amazing writer because a lot of these comedic scenes plays into the characters. So even not even one of the funniest bits, but like when they're on the bus and Del is leading, them all singing Flintstones, and then Neal completely falls on his face with his rendition. That's just a funny scene, just on the surface, but also it's just showing so much of the characters of these two and how different they are, and how even though Neal on the surface would be seen as more successful, right? He's the marketing professional, but he, unlike Del, is not of the people. Like he can't connect to anything else.
All right, who knows a tune here? Who wants to sing a tune? Who's got a song?
I got one.
You got one. Neal Page has got one.
3 coins in a fountain, each one seeking seeking happiness, thrown by 3 hopeful lovers. No.
Flintstones, meet the Flintstones, they're the modern Tony's family.
And so even like a scene like that, I think just it builds the story so much. And I think that's something I realized the greatness of this movie is just like how much is building these things. So when it does come to the end, it's such an amazing emotional payoff for sure. And you also believe in this short time frame that Neal would be capable of inviting Del to come eat Thanksgiving dinner with him.
You trigger a question for me. How much do you think this movie is successful because of the writing and the story that's being told versus the casting and the supporting cast in particular? I feel like there aren't that many bits, that many gags, that many like jokes, but every person peppered throughout, from the boss just taking too long looking at at all the marketing materials trying to make a decision, to Doobie's Taxiola, through Owen, Snapple Lady, Ian the State Trooper, like just all the people throughout that their roles aren't that like jokey, but just the way that they sell and contribute to the story and moving it forward. I don't know which is more powerful, but the blend is perfect in my mind.
It really is. And that was another thing. I think the little details that are in here, one, like you mentioned, the supporting characters, but I mean, it's really kind of throwaway, but it's even when they're in the bus station and they're sitting on this small bench and there's this like old man that's sitting next to them who has like a mouse, like crawling on his knee. I mean, there's all those like there's kind of little things you catch like in the background. You mentioned Owen, but even how like he spits the tobacco and when he wipes his wipes his mouth and shakes Steve Martin's hand. And so anyway, I don't know how realistic it is, but like kind of digging into some of this, they said that was not planned. John Hughes had told that actor to do that. So that's why we don't really see Steve Martin's reaction, because he literally like ran off real fast to wash his hand because he was like completely disgusted, So, but yeah, I mean, what he had between like Candy and Steve Martin here, I mean, just people at their prime of comedic talents. And certainly for like Steve Martin, I don't have pulled up exactly all the movies he did before this, but he's definitely the Jerk was like late 70s or something like this. So this was definitely, I think, a stretch for Martin to really like, he's still so funny, but he's definitely the straight man in this movie. And I really think I might be wrong. I know he did some movies with Lily Tomlin and stuff, and I haven't seen those, but this definitely was, I think, part of that transition to where he was doing more like a movie like Parenthood, that sort of thing. Cause I think Parenthood is like 88 or something like that. Something like right after this. So, yeah. And we're both huge fans of Steve Martin. We listen, I guess, I don't know if it was your mom's or your dad's, but you had the actual like record of Steve Martin's like stand-up comedy album. It's funny to think of now. Did we just sit in your living room and listen to that?
That's exactly right. I was remembering that earlier this week. So we would pull out the record player, which only in our house ever got used at Christmas for some Christmas records. Mm-hmm. And then if I was going to listen to Steve Martin, Bill Cosby, I think we had a Blues Brothers record. Those are like the three things that it got used for: some comedy, Christmas, or a soundtrack of a movie that, ridiculous. I don't know where those things ended up. I hope they're taken care of well. But they had, which one was it? I feel like they had one of his first ones, and then you had the second album. Maybe Let's Get Small. Is that the one you had, or is that the one they had? But you had a CD, because I remember just being so excited that at one house we had one of them, at the other house we had the other. Yeah, there's a period where you could go to either of our houses and get that Steve Martin fix.
Yeah, which naturally made us the coolest kids to be around.
Oh my God. There's so much freaks and geeks that triggers for me.
Oh yeah. Very, very, very much. And then, yeah. I've always loved John Candy too. And I don't think it like really hit me until, I was reading a little bit like the reaction to this movie, and, John Hughes did so many movies that, he was like the teen movie guy, The Breakfast Club, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, those sort of things. So I think critics, always appreciated those movies, but they loved that this kind of was going into a different territory. And I think definitely was like showcasing a different, side to him, even though like, besides that one scene that we talked about, the car rental scene, it's still a fairly like pretty, clean movie, but it was more adult in the characters and the situations and things like that.
Yeah, I was trying to look through and remember, and I read a little bit about Hughes, and had not realized there's some tragic just relational pieces that he had with previous cast members, held grudges and things like that were really interesting to read about. But I think he also did Home Alone. Is that right?
Yeah, he didn't direct that one, but he wrote that movie.
He wrote it. As you were mentioning that this was one of your family's VHSs that they owned, my relationship with him is that Home Alone aspect, that Nana and Granddaddy had two VHSs at their house, Home Alone and The Sound of Music. And so if you're going to hang out at Nana and Granddaddy's and you want to watch a movie, well, for us, it was Home Alone easy. So that was an easy one.
Yeah, you're forgetting a third movie, and it was the VHS copy of Rudy, because I remember our Uncle Ken got everybody a copy of that movie that Christmas. So yeah, he was. We need to ask him sometime, like, why did Rudy speak to you, that much?
That's so funny. Cody Kofer, who you had on to speak about Forgetting Sarah Marshall.
Yeah.
It must have been. He ruined the movie Rudy for me when he just named Rudy as like, this guy's just a whiner. He's just a complainer. And like, obviously he's got some grit, some stick-to-itiveness, but he doesn't have the talent. Yeah, I could go off on it using Cody's voice in my mind, but it's like, that kid does complain a lot. So it doesn't hold up for me the way that it used to really be impactful. And I'm like, oh yeah, Cody's right. I'm on his side.
That's funny. Yeah, you brought up a good point of what's better here, the cast or the writing and stuff. Because I was reading more into this movie, and like it was famously like Hughes shot like so much footage of this film, and like apparently it was like a 4-hour film at some point, and they really had to like narrow it down and cut a lot of things out. And so I do think maybe it's in that case. Thankfully, he had these good performances because they found like a good narrative thread, and the cutting and everything like that. But I don't know if you saw this at all, but part like there's two scenes that aren't as fleshed out in the theatrical cut. But one is the guy that breaks into their hotel room and steals their wallet. Do you know the background of this story at all?
You'll have to remind me. It's not coming to me now.
Okay, so anyway, the whole like Redwood Inn like motel scene, in the middle of the night, this this guy breaks in and steals their wallet and everything. Well, there's several, and you can find the scenes online, but like they ordered pizza. They referenced at some point that the beer spilling on the bed, so you actually see like that play out. Like there's a deleted scene of that. Well, apparently the pizza delivery guy came, and because of the wallet switch up, he didn't get tipped, and so that's the pizza delivery guy came in, and that's why he stole their wallets, is because he didn't get a good tip. So that was one thing. But the other big thing is that his wife, who is played by Layla Robbins, Susan Page, apparently there was this thread where and it kind of makes it understandable why she's kind of so weird on the phone. But the narrative thread is that she was suspicious that Neal was having an affair, and that she thought that Dell was just this made up basically like this adulteress that was in his life. And so that was part of her just big emotional release at the end of the film, is because it ended up that like Dell was actually a male. But I don't know if you ever heard of that before.
Neither of those sound familiar. That's incredible. That there is a lot of story to that movie then. Oh my God.
Yeah. So that kind of makes sense why she's like, the conversations are so like between her and Neal are kind of, I don't know. I mean, they're having a conversation, but you can tell there's like an undertone with her that she's like, I don't know, kind of suspicious or something.
It explains a whole lot. She's very cold. Yes.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. And I'll have to add though, and this is one thing. So Hallie actually watched this movie with us, which was a lot of fun. And she's really good at like picking up certain things or whatever like that. But it especially happened like, so they're almost to Chicago in the rental car when that whole scene, going the wrong way, and the car catches on fire. And I saw in the background, it was the mileage sign. And so it was like 101 mile or 110 miles to Chicago, which is really not that far. And she said out loud, why doesn't his wife just come and pick them up? And I thought that was a very good observation from her. I mean, that's really not that far, and it's like, surely they could have got to a phone and, had them, especially when they get there and it's like all the parents are there, like someone was there to watch the kids. I don't know. That was kind of something that stuck out this time to me.
Give her a high five for me. I thought that same thing this time. I was like, that's not that far. I tried to write out where all they went, and I meant to look at a map from New York to Wichita to Stubbville, Jefferson City, St. Louis. I wanted to map that out, and I forgot to look at it. But yeah, how far really are each of those? But she was very astute in pointing out that last stretch wasn't that bad.
No, it really wasn't. I mean, enough for them to actually stop at a, a motel to like, get sleep or whatever like that. That's just like, I'm just going to see through with the one sleepless night, just to make it back. But, I can, another funny thing I thought, I was also looking about the age of like when Steve Martin was when he did this movie, and he was right around our age now, like when he filmed this. So anyway, that was an interesting thing watching this, like if this was released, today, this is my contemporary that I'm seeing on screen. So thankfully I don't have quite all the gray hair that Steve Martin did at this point in his career.
Man, mine's all found its way to my beard. That's not true. I got plenty up top too.
Yeah.
Have you ever been stranded? Have you ever had to scramble to like piece together something that wasn't the way it was meant to be?
Well, this was kind of like this was kind of one of my movie musing questions for you, but I'll go ahead and answer. I had kind of a story for this, and I'll try to make it as short as I can. But basically, when I worked for Buckner in Dallas, we did this massive like road trip. Buckner had several retirement locations across the state. So we started in Austin, and we did this big loop like to Houston, and our last one was in Longview. So it was this massive like road trips / flights. And Lubbock was one of our stops. And so this was like a big video production. So we had like all the equipment, we had to hire, we had a freelance photographer with her and with us, and a freelance audio guy and all this stuff. So anyway, we get to Lubbock, and basically we were supposed to have this 16 passenger van, and they didn't have it for us. And we had like pulled up in there's like a famous like steakhouse. It's weird to say outside of Lubbock, but it was a little far from What's that?
Oh, never mind. I'm thinking Amarillo. Go ahead.
Oh yeah. But I mean, it's in West Texas, right? So like, like it's not like right where Texas Tech is in a campus or whatever. And because I was kind of the new guy, I was the young guy. They were all very seasoned professionals. They were basically like, "All right, Nathan, like figure it out," because like basically we had to have all this equipment in one vehicle, and basically the rental car company had like shafted us or something like that. But I had to get on the phone with who I knew at the time. I was talking to a college student, and so I kept on going, well, if you don't have the passenger van, you need to bring us two different vehicles, like two different vans. And he wasn't moving at all. And so I didn't quite get to the level that Neal does in this movie, but I was pretty close to it. And so I kind of had to piece that together, but while they were all just inside eating steaks. So that's what came to mind.
Nice. I want to bet it was Kegel's Steakhouse. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah. I went there with my boss when we went through town too. Pretty funny. Mine would be similar time frame. While you were at Buckner, there was a period where I worked for Master Meter, replacing and repairing water meter parts, and we would travel to whatever municipality the company had sold water meters to, and like if a big enough malfunction was occurring, they would send us techs out to go repair them. I was very Del Griffith for that time. I lived on Jeff's couch for I bet it was 6 months maybe. So we would hit the road on Mondays, be gone for the week, and we would come back on Fridays. So Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, I was on Jeff's couch with no lease, no home anywhere, because I was on the road so much. I was like, this doesn't make sense to rent a place. And so we flew. This happened a couple of times over in the Carolinas and North Florida area, where thunder and rainstorm season and lightning would occur there along the Gulf Coast area that would ground our flights. And rather than waiting for the next day's flight, my boss and coworker would frequently decide, well, we're getting a rental car and we're driving back home, which is probably 10, 13 hours or so. And that was around the time I realized I'm not a good night driver. I am very, very drowsy. And so they would split the shift and I would just lay down in the back seat and nap the whole time while they would drive us across country. So I had no contribution whatsoever, but certainly was stranded a few times.
Yeah. No, with Buckner, I didn't even really realize how much travel I did do with Buckner until like really like this last, couple of years of my professional career of being like so grounded. And I'm like, holy crap, I was like on the road all the time. And we didn't quite have those situations, but there was a lot of, showing up at a hotel and somebody had booked it underneath another name. So trying to find, I just remember in that case, like we got there and the guy was like, I'm sorry, we don't have your reservation. I was like, okay, great. And he's like, we have one room available, but it's a handicap room. So the rooms are a little bit bigger. And I was like, I think that's fine. just give me the room. We need a place to sleep tonight. So yeah. So what, it's hard not to get into like the, Chris Farley show territory here with like, oh, you remember when, like, because to me, there's so many quotable lines from this movie and so many scenes, but are there any that really stick out in your mind that you enjoy?
It's funny that you mentioned the Chris Farley show because the highlights of this movie that stand out were also in that trailer that would show at the beginning of Tommy Boy, which I had on VHS, and it was set to the Footloose song. And so it was just a montage of all the different films by the production company. And so you would see Steve Martin doing that, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it would cut between different clips of different movies. And it felt like all of those highlights were encapsulated in that one preview. I'm going to guess Paramount. Does that sound right?
Yeah, it's Paramount. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's in the Paramount trailer on the beginning of Tommy Boy where it's cutting to different movies, and all of the highlights of this one, I feel like were in there. There were the pieces that really, I guess I could see how they were influenced by or became influences for later movies. And those stood out to me in a way that I had not thought about previously. The whole idea of the Odd Couple movie, Tommy Boy, for example, being this genre of things that I have loved. Just let's watch how this burns down and then comes together was such a delight to see. And then, as you mentioned, Steve Martin being around our age now, how much the smallest thing annoys me, maybe more than it would have in the past, like the snoring, the socks off on the plane, like just all kind of just little ticks and little things that really, in the grand scheme of things, aren't that big a deal. But they just stood out to me as like, oh my gosh, I can't, that would drive me crazy.
Sorry. Why?
I particularly think the whole Redwood Inn scene, just from them like realizing they have to share a bed, just all the humor that happens there. But then, like you mentioned, the snoring, but how that becomes, and then the Chatty Cathy doll, sequence, and it's so funny. But then it just flips to this heavy emotional scene. And even Neal in the moment realizes, oh my God, I have gone too far. Even before, Del starts, kind of expressing, I like me, like that whole scene. And then I think leading up to them waking up in bed together, those aren't pillows. And then, and I've always really appreciated Owen in this movie. So I think that whole sequence is just, it's just great because everybody's probably has had to share a room with somebody that may not necessarily, even if it's somebody it's just people have their own habits, and when you have to share that same living space, I mean, it's that, like you mentioned, those just little things that you're like, oh my gosh, I could not stand it if ... or whatever.
And as you mentioned, they're sharing a room, which doesn't always have to mean you share the bed, but that was their, like, obviously it's a movie and it's going to be funnier if that's the case. But I tried to think, I was like, would I sleep on the ground? And there's a time period where absolutely I would have gotten another blanket and slept on the ground. But thinking about in my 40s, would I want to suffer the next day about how painful that would be? Mm-hmm. There's times where when I was laying next to the crib and have fallen asleep, you know, like just telling a story or something, and you just wake up after a half hour and you're like so stiff. And just realizing like there's some logic and calculation that had to happen, and their conclusion was it's worth it to share this bed, which is I get now. I get.
Oh yeah, very much. And then I mean, I think the highway scene is always just completely memorable. Yeah, another like example of just good little back-to-back scenes. You know, even from the car seat, you know, being broken to Dell driving, and I think it's a Ray Charles song, you know, doing that, and just then going the wrong way. That whole sequence is just, and then the car, it's just like, it's just one beat after another, but it all just like sequentially makes sense, you know, and has amazing payoff, even to the fact that this wallet, you know, this switch wallets plays into everything so much, you know. It's very masterful.
Do you wear thick jackets enough to have had moments in the car where you think about that scene as you're trying to decide whether or not to take it off? It happens for me multiple times a winter now.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, especially probably like, I mean, we have some winters here, but probably nothing like you have in Montana.
But yeah, you get in the car, the heater's working, and you're like, oh, it's toasty. And it's wonderful having Betsy to help like pull off the one sleeve while you're going, or hold the wheel, or, you know, this is all before we had kids. I don't know what calculation I would make with kids, maybe just pull over at this point. But the reality, I think about that scene very frequently in the winter.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like when I lived in Edmond and worked at OSU in Stillwater, so that's about an hour drive one way, and it's not like you're driving through city. It's like, it's country, and especially those, like, you know, December months, you know, having the heavy jacket, and especially in the dark where you have to like be careful of deer and that sort of thing. I mean, that definitely always is played out in my head. And especially like you just said, it's like, you know, how easy it is just to pull over and pull it off and then get back on. But we always try to just always make up that time, I guess, you know, like we don't have time to stop and be safe, you know. But
yeah, something about that, like the near death experience in the car, and they turn to skeletons, you know, just the cheesiness of that I love still. It reminded me of do you remember the Dirty Work?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Norm Macdonald, and he turns over and it's Gary Coleman, and then Adam Sandler is like dressed as Satan. Just like I wonder if that's like an homage to an homage. I don't know the right language there to this scene. I don't know if they're throwing back to that, or, you know, I think about Pee-wee and the Large Marge story, like the kick over to the claymation, like freak out scene, and just the hilarity of those, and Tommy Boy, like the deer just destroying the car. Like there's so many just threads of that idea is so funny. Just the freak out in the car, and then it all is just destroyed or fine. And we got to keep going, and we got to keep moving from here on out. Like that is a theme that continually makes me laugh a lot.
Yeah. And, you know, and it's honestly would be hard to replicate this movie now, just if it was set in current day. Because I was even trying to think of, like, okay, what if I lost my wallet, and or even I don't know, it'd just be so easy to get connected back to somebody right now. I know there's a lot of criticism for technology and certain aspects of our society and how much we rely on such things, but on the other hand, I can pretty much find even like booking a hotel, like, when they're in the airport and they're all in lines, waiting to call, and he's like, you called your, wife, I called, a hotel, just that sort of thing, like how fast you could probably find a hotel that way, things like that, I think that's another thing that makes this movie so great, is just because it definitely is a moment in time when it comes. I mean, everybody can relate to the travel woes, and how bad things can happen. But as far as like being so stuck like they are with one another, that I don't think that would really happen today.
Or how SOL he was for not having his car rental receipt. There's going to be an electronic record of that anymore. They could find that. I think you could still do it. And I wish I could think of a more recent movie that has done this well, but I'm sure there are plenty that just follow the model, and it worked great. I'm sure that still exists.
Yeah. Just because you said the word model, I saw this and it completely made sense. But there's an exterior shot really quick of the airplane when they're in the air, and it's actually a reuse of the 707 that was used in Airplane, because that movie was also released by Paramount Pictures. I've seen Airplane so many times. When that flashed on for a second, I was like, there was something that connected that, like, that looks familiar. So I thought you would find that interesting.
That's great. I did not catch that at all. I did think the exterior of the Page house looked familiar, and I wanted to say Home Alone, but there was no circle or horseshoe driveway, but it looked like one of their homes that they have used in plenty of movies.
Oh yeah, no, definitely, for sure.
Movie Musings.
As I mentioned, we were both huge fans of Steve Martin. Besides this movie, do you have a favorite Steve Martin movie or role?
So his stand-up is number one for me. He is the template, the model, the standard for me. But for movies, I hate that I have to go back to it, but it's Three Amigos. It is for sure Lucky Day. There's he took me back to that place when he was doing the, after he gets punched and knocked out or knocked down, and then the guy picks him up by his crotch, and later on he's got the funny voice, the "my nuts hurt" voice, which I was like, that's over the top. I don't need that. But then they kept it going through the next scene, through just the voiceover of the car, and I was like, okay, if they're keeping it, if they're holding on to that voice, it's funnier than just the one little snippet. And then it just made me think of the probably watered down for the tequila in the tavern and the cantina. I think that's probably my Steve Martin standard bearer. The Jerk is going to be the close second. It's just such a delight. But you're going to say something here in just a second when I flip that question on you, and I'm going to be like, oh, why didn't I think of that? But go ahead.
Oh no, you weren't supposed to flip it on me. Like you, I'm probably gonna. I know I'm missing out on something. I mean, it's not my favorite, but Father of the Bride is always just classic. That's another one. If you haven't seen it in a while, you should watch, just because you'll kind of connect with it. You'll see it in a different light for sure. And so, I would have to go with the Three Amigos, even though I'd be interested to know what other people. And then another. Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, another one that's high on my list.
Yes. I don't own Three Amigos, but I do own Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. It's so good. So good.
This movie is kind of interesting. I mean, it's a Thanksgiving movie, and I tried to kind of do a little search of like, what are other Thanksgiving movies, and there's a couple like here and there that have touched on it, but it's kind of interesting. It's like a holiday that hasn't is touched very much. I think, especially now in today's culture, we just move on to Christmas so fast that people kind of forget about Thanksgiving. I think a lot of people are connected to Charlie Brown's Thanksgiving special, so this has made me think, but sorry, this is another kind of tough question, but what is one of your favorite Thanksgiving memories?
We did a lot of Thanksgivings together. I think the stacking on of Thanksgivings is what I really enjoyed, because I feel like we did one at our house around lunchtime and would come over to your house for an evening meal. And I'm thinking about this more in our high schoolish years. I loved the ability to do those multiple events and have the one thing over here and then the get together over there. But there's not a specific one that stands out the way I have some Easter memories or some Christmas memories or get-togethers of that way. But the Thanksgiving ones, there isn't one that I can just pinpoint as, yeah, when I think Thanksgiving, I think of this.
Yeah. Is there a tradition that you particularly enjoy? Like, are you a big turkey guy, or like?
If I have a turkey tradition on Thanksgiving, it is that of the 4 times I have tried to cook a turkey, it was when I was cutting the turkey open, I remembered that I did not take out the giblets and the neck and all of those things. I have probably cooked 3 out of my 4 turkeys with all of the plastic inside of it, with all of the no, you got to take that stuff out, and had to go hide it or continue cooking or fix stuff. I don't like cooking turkeys. I do not enjoy that at all. So typically I try and do a Lebanese type meal, or something that rings true of Nana, or just ham, just something easy like that.
Yeah, ham's always a good go-to. Yeah, so you're better than me. I've never even attempted to try to cook turkey. So
I think my first attempt was, we had Betsy's parents here joining us. It must have been right after we got married, or maybe we were not even married yet, but they were in town. And it was definitely as I was cutting it open that I realized this is undercooked, and there's a bag of plastic right there. And we were all seated down right at the table ready to go. And I was like, well, somebody put all the sides back on, get them staying warm, because I got to go cook this thing longer and hide this mistake. Yeah, pretty embarrassing.
As you're trying to impress
exactly
impress them.
Exactly.
That's hilarious. Well, any kind of closing thoughts with this movie?
I wanted to ask, have you ever ridden a bus or a train? I never have.
A bus or a train? Not a train like that's portrayed in this. I mean, it definitely was a train, but when I was in Peru for a Buckner trip, we got to take you took a train to Machu Picchu, and so so it was like about an hour-long train ride, and then you would get to the village. I can't remember where it was, but then you take this bus. It's actually pretty frightening. Because you go up this mountain and it's switchbacks, but it's these like older buses. It's not like this is like nice charter bus that you would think of. And I mean, these bus drivers, I mean, they do it every day, right? So they're used to, driving these past, but I mean, you're going so fast and passing other buses coming down. But that was like because of all the switchbacks, that was like a 30-minute ride, like up there or whatever like that. And so I'm not saying I'm not grateful that I did. I think it's pretty cool that I can say I saw one of the 7 wonders of the world, but I will say maybe a little overhyped. Because now another thing is we were with a big group, so we had a limited time there, and so then we had to go, like, you have to do the whole thing back. And I mean, it was like a full day to just go and see this. And I mean, it was very cool. I got some really cool pictures. It's definitely a memory I have, but
Yeah. I have 2 thoughts. I don't know if you need to boogie. I don't want to give you too much to have to edit out, but you had primed me with a question that I wanted to know. I was worried, having heard a couple of reviews of movies that I found near and dear, for whatever reason, that you may have been watching for the first time and you're like, oh, I didn't love it. And I was like, oh, I loved it so much. But are there parts of this that did not hold up for you where you're like, in hindsight?
Honestly, I no, I think it's pretty perfectly constructed. I will say, like, when Dell is selling the rings, the Shao Kahn rings, and trying to pawn them off as like earrings and stuff, that scene kind of, I would say that was one of the few scenes. I even at the time I was like, why would people even buy into this? But I would say that's a little weak moment. But I don't know. Was there any scenes like that for you?
The one that did stand out was like the memory montage as Steve Martin's putting together everything about, and then he comes back to the station. Like it's a touching moment, but just the editing of how that came together, I just didn't love it. But I know how necessary it was for the ultimate wrap up.
Yeah, no, I get it. Even when it's a little heavy-handed when he goes, I haven't seen my wife in years. Haven't seen my wife in years. Haven't seen my wife in years. Like the echo. Also, I mean, this is a true 80s movie of like when the soundtrack comes on and they actually use a vocal loop that we've heard from the movie already of Steve Martin, you're messing with the wrong guy or something like that. It's like, yes. What, who was in the room? They decide that would like make those moments. Yeah. There's a couple of those little audio clues.
And then I would be really curious to hear the and for people who don't have the experience of traveling, then like probably Hallie watching it, I wonder if she needed the part at the very beginning where he looks at his ticket and they highlighted the time. Like they're teaching you how to read an airline ticket by that decision. And I like, for people nowadays, maybe needed. And I wonder how necessary that was. I grew up with a father who issued airline tickets as a business. Like I was fluent in those pieces of paper. So I'm looking at it from a different lens than others, but I was like really surprised that they had to highlight or felt that they needed to highlight that part. I just kind of chuckled at that. I don't know.
Yeah. And I mean, it definitely hits more now of understanding. I mean, I knew in the moment, like when we watched it as kids, like how hard it was for him to make that flight. I mean, they show how difficult it is, but even now, even being in Norman, Oklahoma now and thinking, okay, we're going to go to Arkansas on Tuesday, you're starting to factor in like traffic. And this is like Oklahoma, right? The fact that he is trying to make this flight like in New York City on like Thanksgiving week. I mean, those elements are definitely like, oh my gosh, yeah, that would be even hard now to pull off. So yeah. And I was trying to equate like the guy that, has him pay him off for the cab. I forgot how much he ends up paying him, but I mean, with the inflation, like, I mean, that was a pretty good bit of pocket change he paid him there.
That's a really good point. The thing, I don't want to end on the like nitpicking, so I feel bad about asking that question at the end. I loved the diner scenes, like we're chatting over a meal, where like just the bit about being in those places and this is our pause, we've got to have a meal and try and figure out what the next move is. Like just those types of realistic feeling Dumb and Dumber, like hitting you with just this, okay, like there's just all these diner scenes that have just been classics throughout, and I had forgotten how much a part of this one this movie incorporates those diner scenes. And just I loved every bit of the movie, for sure, as cheesy or as much as I want to like pick apart a couple of things, but there are just an overwhelming amount of parts where I just grinned knowing what was about to come or having forgotten what just happened. And then really loved the opportunity to to connect and have this conversation.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for coming on. And as always, check out movieyourlife.com for episode reviews and more. If you love this podcast, please take a moment to rate and review it. It really helps us with finding new listeners. Also, please consider supporting our podcast. There's a donate link both in this episode's description and on the homepage of our website. No donation is too big or too small. The support you offer goes a long way in helping us continue producing the content you love. Certainly, Greg, you love the content, right?
I love it. I love that I got to be a part of it. Thank you so much for allowing that.
No, well, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy life. I'm glad we got to connect, and even though we don't get to spend Thanksgiving with each other in the coming days, this kind of felt like that connection there.
Absolutely. Appreciate you making time for me, Nathan.